There are so many challenges to ground up development. It's important to know the right people, especially for legal matters. We're excited to welcome one of those right people to the Stories Behind the Door podcast from the legal firm of Prime and Tuvell in my hometown of Mount Laurel, New Jersey. Welcome, Tyler Prime. I'm excited to jump into this one today. Before I get to my guest, who I'm looking forward to talking with, I want to give a shout out, as always, to our sponsor, Kiwi 2 Construction. Usually this graphic pops up pretty easily. There we go. We got the graphic. Wayne Woosley and his crew, when they say it's going to get done, it gets done. Really proud to have them supporting the podcast. If you guys need steel for a job, reach out to Kiwi 2 Construction. They will take care of you. And now I get to talk to this guy, Tyler. I've been really looking forward to having you on the show ever since we first met. I got introduced to you through our mutual friend, Mitch Feldman, who is a big, huge personality in the self-storage space. I'll never forget walking into your office. You don't know me from a hole in the wall. You welcomed me like we'd known each other for 20 years. And so I've been looking forward to having you on the podcast ever since that day. Really excited to dig into some of the things going on in the self-storage world. I always start the podcast the same way, which is self-storage is such a niche industry, especially for someone like you on the legal side of it. I love to hear the story of how someone got involved in this industry.
Yeah, so actually the first deal I did, the first modern self-storage deal I did, I actually found the site for Mitch and his group. It was a site in Maple Shade. I think it was early 2019, late 2018, and that's how we connected and kind of just started rolling from there. We had done prior old self-storage facilities years ago, and that kind of died off. You know, the old single-story roll-up door model. And then we did do one or two modern public storage projects directly for them. And it just seemed like maybe that was enough. And then this boom kind of started coming, bubbling up very slowly. And Mitch was kind of the charge that got us started on the latest boom of these modern facilities.
Not a bad guy to hook up with if you're going to get involved in developments, as he's just gung-ho going crazy, which is awesome, especially right now as we're seeing a little slowdown. I love being able to talk to you. You're about 7 miles away from me, probably less than that as the crow flies. I lived a half a mile from that Maple Shade site at the time and can remember still when that was a catering business, and what an interesting, unique site. Really, had some challenges there. Talk to me about the process of identifying sites from a legal standpoint and how you think it's going to be a potential self-storage site, because that's a catering business. It's not necessarily a site you think is going to work great for self-storage. How do you go about that entitlement process, make sure that legally it's going to be something that someone can build on?
Sure. So I had gotten connected maybe a few months prior to that to a broker who was specializing in looking at some self-storage sites. So he gave me the kind of rundown on 3 mile population incomes, just the basic framework of what to look for these facilities. So our first look, when I punched this in, it was a mutual friend was selling the site, punched this in, and I'm like, this thing meets all of the criteria. So then Maple Shade generally, as you know, is a relatively friendly town. They're very business friendly. So you can make a few calls. You can get, kind of that initial due diligence out of the way very quickly. And they were really receptive to it. They thought the existing building was kind of on its way out. It had been there for a long time. It had been on and off again vacant. And they were looking forward to seeing it redeveloped. So once we kind of had that initial okay and dug into it deeper, it turned out to be a really easy one to get through. We punched that thing through relatively quickly.
Yeah, driving up and down Route 73 every day. My turnoff was literally the jug handle right after that spot. The amount of cars that drive by that every day. And as you said, the population and the demographics. What an amazing site. I'm a little sad that I didn't know you 6-7 years ago when you came up with that site. Who would have liked to have had that at that's the second. There's two of them. Mitch has got one up in Hamilton that he's working on right now too, that I was fighting to try and get to. So I love hearing those stories. Thankfully, really good friends with Mitch. So not upset that he
They're wonderful guys, great group, and really easy to work with. And they've been big supporters of mine, and they're really, really wonderful guys.
So I want to ask you that you said you come back to self-storage more recently as we've gone through. Obviously, we had a massive, the two most record years for ground up development, 23, 24, slowed down a little bit in 2025. But where was your background illegally? Like, what were you doing that before you really kind of dove headfirst into storage?
So what I handle is commercial development kind of straight through, right? So I'll handle anything from entitlements to financing to the transactions. And we've been doing that for a long time. So whatever sector is hot, right? There was originally, 15, 20 years ago, there was a huge run up in residential. There was a industrial warehouse boom. There's been quick service restaurants, banks, pharmacies, anything you see around you that's coming up. We've probably been involved in one or some of those. We've done applications all over the state. We're in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. So you're seeing whatever's hot, whatever sector's hot. The process is a little bit different, but it follows the same principles. So you can really take any of these users and kind of apply the same background to those users.
Interested to get your take because I had a bunch of careers before I got into self storage. Even within real estate, I was doing residential fix and flip and wholesaling.
Yeah.
I find self storage to be so unique in terms of the camaraderie. You mentioned Mitch, right? And like, what a great guy, but not an outlier to me in the self storage space. I'm interested to get your take, having kind of worked across these various real estate asset classes, what you think of self storage specifically.
Sure. It's a really interesting that you say that because it's funny how openly these guys communicate with each other, right? If you're doing a quick serve restaurant or something, you're worried about who else is going to be involved, who's going to try to take your site, who will open up nearby and compete with you, right? Whereas these guys, it just seems like whatever's in the water with self storage, they're all collaborating. Hey, I'm opening in this area. It kind of tipping each other off to avoid any kind of pitfalls, spending money unnecessarily. It's really unique. I haven't seen anything quite like the self-storage world. It's just a unique bunch of guys. It really is.
Definitely found that to be true. It's one of the reasons I have so much fun doing the podcast is there's just so many great individuals in the
Sure.
industry that you get to talk to and get to know a little bit. I want to get to know Tyler Prime a little bit. Let's like take you out of the office and what's going on in your day to day that's giving you motivation. Obviously, doing legal work in the commercial real estate field is not an easy haul. You're faced with challenges every day. What's going on outside your legal career that's making you motivated and want to go in and get to work?
Sure. So obviously, we've talked about this before, but family's really big for me. I'm married, two kids. I have a son who's 12, is going to be 13 in a couple months, and my daughter turned 10 over the summer. So that phase of life, as anyone who's a parent knows, right? You're running around, you're coaching sports, you're kind of ducking out early to catch that after school sport or activity or dance competition or whatever your kids are involved in. And it really that's the motivator, right? That's why you want to work for yourself if you can or have a business that's flexible. You want to be able to kind of balance your drive to be successful and be the best at what you do with being around, right? That's the purpose. What's the point of having the success if you don't have anyone there to share it with you? So that's my biggest driver. Family is always number one priority.
We have talked about that, and we're certainly very aligned in that. I busted out of a meeting at 4 o'clock yesterday, right at 4:25, so I could scoot over to Medford Tech and go watch my daughter play soccer for a while.
Awesome.
And can't agree with you more, right? Without that base of what it is you're doing it for, how do you go work for yourself and create that kind of motivation to get in every day?
Sure.
Love that, and one of the reasons that we bonded so quickly is that shared love of our family. I want to come back a little bit and go to because I kind of mentioned that question and I asked it first because this is not always a fun job, right? Like you talked about the Maple Shade deal and it was easy, but not easy. The town was easier to work with than maybe some others would be. There's no such thing as an easy, $20 million development deal. We go to some other deals and I'll go back. I just went through Voorhees Township. I got denied on a by right use by a planning board, right? And really had no recourse. What I'd like to kind of draw on from you from a legal standpoint, what are some of the things up front? Like I wish I had known at that time that there's a chance the planning board could deny my by right use and I would have built into my contract an automatic appeal process. Whether they would have agreed to it or not, I don't know. But my question for you is what maybe the number one thing to start with that if somebody's getting into this development process, what do they need to understand legally right from the beginning to make sure they're protecting themselves in these deals?
Sure, sure. So the biggest thing, especially in our area, and it differs throughout the country. Pennsylvania is a little bit different, but specifically here, you really need to understand what not only what your use is, but how does the town interpret your use, right? Self storage is a great example. A lot of these old ordinances haven't been updated. You've seen it, not what 1960, 1970, not uncommon. You're going to see self storage described as that old kind of single bay orange door roll up, right? If you go in with something, the client's first take is, hey, this is going to be a great modern building. It's going to be, new and everything's good tax rateable. But the town's perspective, they might not see it that way. They might see it as something that doesn't conform with their ordinance. And that's going to be a use variance or something that has this heavier burden to get approved, right? So you might go into your contract phase thinking this is easy. It fits. There's a carve out for storage. Town might look at it differently, and there might not be a carve out for it, right? You might not have built those protections into your agreement. So whenever we can, we like to get involved as early as possible. I have a huge due diligence checklist, which I could share with you. Kind of goes through, point by point, or really in this area, what you need to be aware of. And there's 50 things on this list that you should be checking before you commit any kind of real capital or time to your project. It's a tough place to do business.
I love that, and I guess the follow-up question is then how important, like, Mitch Feldman's out of Miami, right? He's obviously developed a bunch of stuff in New Jersey now, but how important is it then to make those inroads with the people that do know? Like, the difference between a Maple Shade and a Voorhees and a Cherry
Sure.
Hill and a Haddonfield because you've dealt with them. How important is it for those of us on the development side to make sure that we get tied into someone local to be able to help make those conversations happen early in the process?
Sure. Yeah. I do a lot of work in Voorhees. It's funny you mentioned that. When I did the project for Feldman there, we had a great experience, but we really kind of ironed out building a plan that needed no relief. We went in, had neighbors, we had all kinds of objections, but there was no relief. We didn't need anything. We conformed 100%, no relief. So that one specifically, a good example kind of after that, this project's done and approved. 6, 8 months later, I do a good bit of work there, so the township recommended me actually to a developer in Los Angeles, called me and said they were interested in building a storage facility. I said, "Well, it's public record. There's one approved." They said, "Well, our due diligence folks have said there's, nothing online, nothing live. It's kind of a miscommunication, right?" I said, "Well, let's at least put out an OPA request, open public records request, right? You can get a copy of everything that's out there, anything that's been submitted, construction permits, any of that stuff." And it turned out, as we all know, there were 4 projects in kind of in that phase. Mitch's was in first, he's up first, but there were multiple behind it. I don't know if they all came to fruition, but
They
you
didn't
had a
all come
handful of these things coming live, and that's a real risk for somebody when you think you're relying on good information that turns out to not be good information.
at the site that I actually got denied by the planning board. We were going to do small bay flex, not storage, precisely because of that. The person who had the contract on the site before me was going to do storage on it, and they pulled out of the deal, which I think was incredibly smart given the saturation that was coming to that market. I want to play on that, right? One of the big things we're seeing, and New Jersey is not alone in this, but certainly New Jersey is a place where this is happening, is property taxes. Assessments are coming up on, yeah, right. I didn't, your reaction says it all, right? So, from a legal standpoint, we've seen the REITs just had their earnings call for the second quarter a couple months ago. They'll come out again. They're having a real hard time showing year over year operational income growth because the expenses, whether it's insurance, but especially property taxes, taking a chunk out of their bottom line. From a legal standpoint, and we've talked to Mitch about this, this is something that happened to him in his Voorhees facility and is happening at others around the area. How do we address an assessment coming in and all of a sudden your property taxes, in some cases, more than doubling? What's the recourse for a developer owner to be able to fight that? Can you do it ahead of time or do you just kind of have to deal with it once it happens?
Sure, it's a good question. So there's always a recourse. You
You
can
give me credit
file
for the questions anytime you want. I'll take that. I don't mind at all, Tyler.
you can file a property tax appeal at any time in New Jersey. It's a rolling basis. It's basically once a year you have your window to file, but you're always welcome to do that. The issue with property tax appeals in New Jersey is just like many other things, right? They're bogged down. So you're some of these more famous ones, the Morristown Mall, which is near both of us, that had 8 to 10 years of appeals running at one time. So this isn't instant relief. You're not sending a letter saying, "Hey, I think I'm overassessed. Here's some comps. Okay, sorry, we're gonna, relieve that burden for you." It's a multi-year process, and it can keep kind of adding up as you go. We've had some luck talking in advance. We have a few dozen property tax appeals pending now, but some towns where we know they're a little bit more flexible or more interested in seeing a project come forward, we will try to establish some of that in advance, right? But you're competing with a lot of different factors. You build a self-storage facility, you're submitting construction permits, and they might use some of that cost to build out your taxable base. So you could be, north of $10 million on some of these buildings, regardless of what the assessor agrees with. When they see that construction permit submitted, they're going to use some of that to influence the number.
I want to go down this road a little bit with you. It's something that you and I have talked about before is the pilot programs that are available in some places. Tell me a little bit about what that means. I'll let you explain it because you certainly understand it better than I do. And what kind of process that is if you're a developer to go through.
Sure. So there's multiple different tax incentives in New Jersey. A pilot program, for anyone who's not aware, is just a payment in lieu of taxes. It's essentially an alternate structure that gives you it gives you a different flat payment or graduated payment over 5 years, 20 years, or 30 years. And what that really does is for the municipality's benefit in New Jersey, when a pilot payment comes in, they're required to kick 5% of that payment to the county, but 95% of that revenue stays in the municipality. In a normal situation, in an average town in New Jersey, you're going to pay in your regular property taxes. Out of that 100% property tax, the municipality keeps about 15% of that. So contrast that 15% versus 95, they're kicking that money out to the schools, to the county, to the all different jurisdictions get that money. Oh, additionally, when you file a property tax appeal on a regular property tax appeal, if there's a refund due where you win that in court, the municipality is responsible for the whole refund. They can't go back to the county, they can't go back to the school district and get that money to pay it back. So we try to use that in advance as leverage. Like, hey, look, you either do the pilot, you'll keep more revenue, or if you go forward with regular taxes, strike us a reasonable value. Because once you collect this money, if we win on an appeal, you're gonna have to pay it back with interest, and you didn't even get to keep it all. So it's an interesting process, and if you can get it, it really is a big saver for the.
What's a downside to a developer from trying to go through a pilot process?
They're hard to get. They have a bad, somewhat, as I'm sure you've seen. They have kind of a bad public perception. People feel that it's kind of robbing the schools of funding they would get otherwise. The counterpoint to that, and the argument we've typically used, is that these projects that qualify for it, maybe they're not generating school children, right? A self storage facility isn't adding any new children to the school system, so it might make more sense for the municipality to keep more of that revenue and use it for sewer upgrades or road upgrades or something else, that more fits with a match to the project.
I'm interested to kind of go down this road with you a little bit. Obviously, we're starting to get pushback in certain areas. One of the big pushbacks we got when we were going through with the small bay flex, we had 36 people from the town show up, and it's small bay flex, but it kind of looks like storage if you're showing it to somebody who's not involved in our industry. It's got roll up doors and it looks sort of similar.
Sure.
There's starting to be some pushback in municipalities from different storage facilities. How do you, you talked a little bit about the Voorhees project you did with Mitch. How do you, as a lawyer, fight that with a planning board if there's people coming up to try and argue with it?
Yes, you really need to have a good team put together. You really need to have, especially it's town by town, but depending on what the issues are, and back to Mitch, he's done a great job with this, right? The project that you referenced in Hamilton, we have one down the road in Homedale, and it was really built, to kind of conform with the community. If you look at those plans, I don't think, well, I don't have them in front of me, but if you look at it, it really looks like, a semi-residential use, a multifamily building or something like that. It really blends. So knowing what the town's concerns are thinking, who's around me and what are their issues going to be. If it's traffic, you really need to have a sharp traffic guy that can address it, your planner, right? Your architect. You really need to be able to combat those objections because as you've seen, sometimes that momentum of this public opposition is enough to sway a board. And whether you can file an appeal or win. Either way, it's a costly, time-consuming process for you to do so. So trying to kind of vet some of that out in advance can sometimes save you or save the project.
Wish I'd heard that about 8 months ago, Tyler. That one's, in case you can't tell, that one's still eating at me. Couple questions I want to talk to you about things that are going on right now. The first one is we've seen a drastic slowdown in ground up development in 2025. You're obviously got to be feeling a little bit of that as somebody who makes a living off the legal side of it. I'll ask you that question. Are you feeling any of that slowdown from your side of it as far as how many deals are coming your way from the self-storage side?
We're overall we're up year over year, but I'd say as in terms of new ground up self storage builds specifically, it's probably down. We have a handful still pending, and then others that are in various phases of either entitlements or resolution compliance. But I think as a whole, I've seen at least over the last year, 18 months, more conversion projects. People are floating, hey, is this possible? You're seeing deals that might not go through, but people are looking a little bit outside of the box, which I think is, potentially a good path forward to save on some of those upfront costs and maybe still keep the industry moving and deliver on that, kind of a more value proposition.
I'm interested because you obviously talk to a bunch of different people. What's your outlook like as we're going into fourth quarter 2025, into 2026, maybe even into 2027? Where are you feeling the industry's at, and what do you think is going to happen, specifically when it comes to whether it's conversions or ground up development?
I think what we're hearing, and I'm seeing kind of on the back end of a lot of these deals, is as everybody knows, it's not a secret. The financing of these buildings, right? The interest rates, where all that has gone, has really impacted these costs because when you magnify a 1 or 2 point increase on a loan over tens of millions of dollars, these are real, incredible numbers, and you can't just go back to your tenants and say, hey, your 10 by 10's going up by $500 a month. All right, those numbers don't work. Pencil backwards on a deal that doesn't make sense. So it's definitely impacting and it's for sure hurt. But I do think that there are guys that are going to try to keep pushing through this, forging forward, because then when the next wave, if enough people back out, interest rates come down, you refi, you're ahead because you've got a product that's built, it's new and it's available, being leased up. You can get that thing stabilized and the interest rate down. It affects your whole cost, and maybe you're 2, 3 years ahead of the guys that then.
Where it pays to be a Barry Sherman, who's my boss now at S3 Partners, or a Mitch Feldman, and have 20 plus years of experience in industry, where you sort of have the relationships to be able to pull through in a time like this. Where, to your
Sure.
point, I did a study the other day on a storage facility, 1,250,000 of NOI. You DSCR at 1.25, you can get a mortgage that costs you $1,000,000. The interest rates cost almost $3 million in valuation on a facility, in 100,000 square foot facilities.
It's
I mean,
crazy.
it makes a massive difference in your ability
Yes.
to underwrite something that's gonna
Yes.
work. To your point, I'm interested to know. I know you're local to New Jersey and Pennsylvania for most of the work you do, but there's been some legal things going on. I don't know how much you keep your ear to the ground, but SB 709 just passed in California. They were trying to put rental increase caps. Eventually, that got taken out of the bill, but it is a disclosure bill. So, assuming Gavin Newsom signs the bill, which I can't imagine he wouldn't, given his political affiliation,
Sure.
um, it's going to force self-storage facilities in California to say exactly what kind of promotion they're giving someone on the front end. They're going to have to say exactly how much a potential rent increase could be in the first 12 months that tenant's there. How much do you pay attention to that stuff? And do you worry for New Jersey as being a place where we know that, laws tend to follow in the California does something, New York does something, New Jersey tends to be on that path. How much of an impact can that have on self-storage, and how much are you paying attention to it?
Sure. Well, first of all, obviously paying attention to any industry issues. We try to, everybody here's communicating and kind of keep those issues at the forefront. But for sure, it can have an impact. I think guys like Feldman and some of these other bigger operators can better kind of weather those storms because you've had people over the last 5, 6 years open quickly and kind of operate at that rock bottom number, these promos to try to fill out, right? Get it to look stabilized as much as possible, kind of inflate some of those forward rolling numbers just to be able to sell out of it quickly. So eliminating that type of developer potentially isn't the worst thing. And then the flip side of that coin, right? What's better for the consumer? Transparency and making this stuff kind of at the forefront. What it actually costs, also not the worst thing. Kind of third prong of that point, politically in New Jersey, there's a big governor's race coming up in November. Um, Jack Ciattarelli fan for sure. I mean, I think he's going to do a lot of great things for the state, and he has a really good shot to win. New Jersey, unlike some of the other places you referenced recently, has kind of a history of bouncing back and forth, right? And politically, I think that makes sense. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, it's not a bad idea to get a different perspective.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm laughing as you're saying big Jack Ciattarelli fan, because there's very few people that are involved in commercial real estate as a career that don't tend to lean a little bit Republican, just straight from the we understand how painful some of the, I don't want to say useless, but sort of illogical restrictions that sometimes are out there that many times weren't intended to create the pain that they cause for us. But a lot of times, ultimately, who does it hurt? If I do a podcast with Chris Berg, the Self Storage Report, and we did Cerritos, California had a town meeting, and one of the members of the board was like, We have an oligopoly. We've eliminated any other self-storage companies from opening up. There's only 4 in the town, and they're allowed to put whatever price they want because they're overflowing with people. And ultimately, who are we hurting by creating this restriction? We're
Exactly.
hurting the citizens of our town that can't rent self-storage for a reasonable rate. So you won't hear any argument from me. I'm a staunch libertarian. I want as little restrictions. Let the capitalist system work. It work, and we're feeling it right now, right? You
Yes,
mentioned this in self-storage before. There are places that are getting oversaturated, and those developers that weren't really on top of what they were doing, they're going to feel the pain of that. And
absolutely.
ultimately, do I feel bad for someone like that? Sure, I do. But on the flip side of it, that's capitalism. Sometimes you make a decision and it doesn't necessarily work out the way you wanted it to. Hopefully you learn and improve. I'm going to
Sure.
get to another question that I want to ask you, which is I came in and I met you at your office. I stop by every once in a while. I've stopped by a couple times. You were having a fun summer out with your kids, which is exactly where you should be as I'm driving by in August. You got a golf simulator in the back room of your office. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So that kind of came about as a post-COVID thing. What we found from our, marketing and networking aspects is people weren't out as much. They didn't want to be out at night. The burden of the 5-hour golf round, right? The kind of endless breakfast, lunches, dinners, it just felt a little bit monotonous. When in our building, when we've had the opportunity, we've always grabbed any available square footage. So if somebody leaves, we'll kind of snatch that up and try to expand on the window line, have some available offices. We had a big dead space behind it and just kind of hatched this idea to put it together. And it's been a really big hit with our friends and clients. So you have people come by for an hour, you do a little closest to the pin, you have some food, and everybody's on their way. You get the business out of the way and doesn't tie up everybody's full day. So it's been pretty neat.
Tyler Prime, man, it's been such a pleasure. I knew I was going to have a fun time shooting the junk with you. I told you we'd stick this to as close to a half hour as we could, which I'm going to try and do. As I wrap up, just want to say thank you so much for sharing so much great information. Somebody wants to get in touch with you. They're looking at a development in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, anywhere in the near area around us, whether that's down into Delaware. I know you guys are very intelligent and everything in the surrounding area. How do they get a hold of you guys? What's the best way to grab Tyler Prime and get some of your time?
Sure. So website's primelaw.com right on there. LinkedIn, you can find me there. And I can also share my cell or whatever's easiest for you. You can put it out with the video. I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time. I love talking development. So right up my alley. And I appreciate the time as well. This is fun.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Guys, if you have any trouble getting a hold of Tyler at all, which is not overly difficult, so I don't think you will, but if you do, reach out to me because I'll get you connected to him very quickly. Obviously super intelligent and tied into what's going on in our industry. And Tyler, thanks so much for spending the time again, and looking forward to having you come back on again. As we run into some of these legal things that come up, would love to have you back on and share some insight with us. Thanks so much.
Love it. I'm always available. Thanks again for the time. This is great.
Before we log off, I'm going to give one more shout out to my friends at Kiwi 2 Construction. Wayne Woosley and his team have been providing steel for self-storage for 30 plus years, leaders in our industry. And we are really proud on the Stories Behind the Door podcast that they've chosen to back our podcast as our main sponsor. Shout out to Wayne and his team. You can go to kiwiconstruction.com if you have any steel needs. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week for the next episode of Stories Behind the Door.